to change the slides. I'm sorry.
Please.
I'm sorry.
Good morning. How are we? I'm feeling good. I'm feeling really good. I got on the plane last night. And I went to work on this presentation to really deliver this message to you guys today. Tell you a little bit about my story. And as soon as Rob gets my slides up, we'll start. He lets me call him Rob now because I've graduated. That's not true. I'm respectful, Mr. Evans, but now Rob, of course. Appreciate it, Blue. This is one of my theater teachers from my school, from Chadwick School. His name is David Blue. Please, this is Blue. He always compliments my style. I'm into fashion. I eat my shoes. So yeah. Any day now, Rob.
There we go.
Can you guys hear me in the back?
Yep. Yes.
No.
No?
You can't?
The mic is better.
Use the mic?
Yeah.
You're limiting. You know I like to flow. So today, I want to tell you a story about my life. How I grew up in two disparate worlds that sometimes had to fight. My home in Compton and my school at Chadwick were seemingly adverse. Yet they each played a role in teaching me how to traverse. How to walk on earth and in this thing we call life. But please, believe me, there was much strife. You see, at Chadwick I was lost, and in Compton I was found. At Chadwick, I soon developed a home because the lessons I learned in Compton were so profound. Lessons that made me the man I am today. Fearless, bright, bold. EJ. In telling you about my story, I hope to enhance yours. I hope to show parents and teachers too how they can open doors. Opening doors that allow our students to get the most out of their independent school education. So they walk away from these institutions with a clear identity and a resolute foundation. So to preface my story, I give you this hook. It's about much, much more than classes and books. So I was born May 4th, 1999, to Cherie Lewis Devon and Elijah Christopher Devon, and to my beautiful grandmother, Mary Lynn Glasgow. Now they're gonna kill me for showing you these pictures from 1999, but it's okay. And I think we could all agree that my birth, it was a sign of hope for my family. They thought that I could be the one. I could be the one to change the narrative of what it meant to be a Devon, of what it meant to be a Glasgow. But soon reality hit, and the hope dissipated a little bit. My father went to jail where he'd be for the next 13 years of my life. My mother was struggling to develop her professional career as a teacher. And finally, we were living in Compton, California, immersed in gang warfare and in poverty. So questions arose. Could I make it? Would I make it? Were the odds too great? Would the journey be too hard? But then God sent a light, as he always does, and that light was the Independent School Alliance. Let's give them a cheer. And it's just so ironic that I'm now here today speaking about, it's so crazy, excuse me as I digress. The Independent School Alliance, and they, of course, their work, they take kids from these inner cities and bring them to, expose them to independent education, usually in more wealthy areas. And the Independent Alliance showed me Chadwick School. And my mom tells me a story, so I made it to the final round, and in the final round back then, Chadwick used to interview the parents. And Chadwick is on this really big hill, right? And you have to drive up the hill and go through all these streets, and then you get to the final street, it's Academy Drive. You make a left turn, and you kind of just see the Chadwick sign and these big gates, and my mom told me that when she saw the school, she began to cry. Because in that very moment, she knew that my life was going to change. She knew that if I was granted the opportunity to attend this institution, all of our lives would never be the same. And I think she was right about that in the moment. But in that moment, she failed to realize how hard it would actually be. How my being a black boy from Compton at Chadwick School in Palos Verdes would be tough. How Chadwick and Compton would at times work adverse to one another. How I would struggle to figure out who I was as a black male and as so much more. Because I was going to be raised at Chadwick and in Compton for the next 13 years of my life. Now, I would tell you a cute little story about the first day of school at Chadwick, but I honestly don't remember. What I do remember, however, is that there used to always be these recess where the kids would go out and play. And in kindergarten, we had these A to Z workbooks where you practice your writing skills, your letters, what have you. And I remember that every recess, I would never go out and play. I would always be in the classroom working on these workbooks. This is a picture from our yearbook, actually, from 2005. And I did that because at an early age, I recognized that my skin color didn't look like most people's skin color at the school. When there were events, I noticed that everybody else's dad was there and mine wasn't. And when kids would ask where my dad was, I said he was in Hawaii on a business trip. And it's funny retrospectively, but it was really sad in the moment. Because I really felt as though I didn't belong at this place. And so in order to escape all of that, I dived into the books. But what's interesting is at home, that very thing was perpetuated by my mother. So she, during winter breaks, whenever I had a break from school, my mom had work and she would give me these workbooks. And she would tell me that if you don't finish, they probably had 200 math problems in them. My grandma remembers, and Auntie Winnie over there in the corner does too. She would tell me, if you don't have this book done by the time I get home, you're going to be in trouble. And let me tell you, trouble was not something you wanted to be in my household. It was something you wanted to be out of, in fact. So I did those workbooks religiously. And so very early on in my career, at Chadwick and in Compton, both intentionally in Compton and inadvertently at Chadwick, I dove into the books. My career became about focusing on the books, about grinding in the books. But I soon realized that couldn't be all of it. That even if I was doing well in school, that didn't mean that I was going to get the most out of the experience. Now, fast forward to first grade, I was in teacher, for the sake of the example, teacher A's class. And I was doing well in her class. I was probably one of the brightest students in the class. But as I grew older and I gained more confidence and more friends, I became gregarious. I became inquisitive. Probably talked more than I should, as most first graders do. Probably asked more questions than I probably should have. But not more than my peers, I would like to think. But soon I was labeled disruptive, a bad kid. I was sent out of class probably every other day. I was sent to the principal's office probably every other day. And honestly, I was almost expelled from Chadwick in first grade. And this kind of perception, this characterization of who Elijah was, just remind you, just a first grader, no more than 7 years old, was something that I carried with me in my elementary years at Chadwick. Because in fourth grade, teacher B accidentally called me an idiot, and eighth grade teacher C accidentally called me a slave, and teacher D, the others, didn't care enough to find out, to ask me questions, to learn about me. So from a very young age, I started to ask myself, what's wrong with you, EJ? Because my mom bought into the narrative that I was a bad kid, and I did too, because that's what these administrators were telling us. There's something wrong with your child. Meanwhile, at home in Compton, gang warfare was at an all-time high. I remember so many nights I would be asleep, my mom would come in, and we would lay on the ground in our hallway just in case any stray bullets came through our house. At the same time, my dad was still away. I would talk to him maybe every other week, pick up the phone and say, "You have a call from..." But there was one thing I had in Compton that I didn't have at Chadwick at an early age, and it was an uplifting community. My mom always kept me in all types of things. I ran track, I played football, and believe me, we stayed in church. And in all of these things, I started to develop an uplifting community that kept me going. A group of people that would say, "Go, EJ." My grandma used to always say, "Go, boy." And they used to tell me, "Go to that school and do what you need to do." They uplifted me, they supported me, they were behind me 100%. So of course things were hard in Compton. But having that uplifting community made it all so much better. It's interesting because I went to Chadwick, I think, to escape Compton. Chadwick was supposed to be the place of safety, but it became a place of anxiety. In Compton, the place that I was trying to run away from was the very thing that kept me going. Hence my dichotomous realities. At Chadwick, I was a black boy in a white sea who was labeled disruptive, bad. I was lost, didn't feel like I had anybody that supported me. Sure, I had friends, but I didn't have administrators, I didn't have adults supporting my development. And in Compton, my dad was gone, there was gang warfare, but I had a community that uplifted me. And this made me realize that there are different types of communities in this process. In Compton, I had an uplifting community. But at Chadwick, I didn't have what I call a check-in community. I didn't have a group of adults that were saying, "EJ, how are you doing? What's it like being black here?" They knew my dad was incarcerated, it was on my file. Do you think anybody ever asked me about that? And finally, I didn't have a relatable community. I felt as though there was no one at the age of 9, 10, that there was no one who understood what I was going through. My best friend, Nicholas Benson, who went to Chadwick, he was black, yes. He grew up in Redondo Beach. His mom was a doctor, his dad was in the house. He couldn't even begin to understand what I was going through. And in that same vein, my mom, my dad, my grandma, everyone who I knew from around Compton couldn't understand either, because they had went to public schools most of their life and had been around their own kind. In short, I felt alone. In short, I was lost. In short, I didn't know who to turn to or what to do. But nevertheless, there was a light that emanated from my house in Compton. There was a light that refused to dwindle, and it was established and propagated by my mother. Every morning, when I used to get up for school, Joel Osteen would be on the television. And no matter what the message was, before I left for school, my mom would tell me, "God never gave up, so neither can you." She told me that I needed to be resilient in all things. And so I decided not to give up on Chadwick. I almost left Chadwick and went to Loyola, I kid you not. But I didn't give up on Chadwick, I decided not to. And then, God brought an angel into my life, as he always does. So in 7th grade, Chadwick hired this teacher. A black guy, about 6 foot tall. With a mediocre style, might I add. His name was Mr. Robert Evans. Yeah, come on, we can give him some. And I've never told Mr. Evans this, but he changed my life. He was the first person at Chadwick to check in. He used to ask me questions like, how are you feeling? How are you grappling with being black at Chadwick? How's your dad? And all these things, he was the first member of my check-in community. And he reestablished my faith in Chadwick and in this process. I knew that he extended himself to me, and I realized that I needed to extend myself as well if I wanted to get the most out of this experience. Sure, I was still doing well in school through all of this. But now I know I needed to take a step further. And he, I think, was the catalyst for that. I know was the catalyst for that. And so I did. Very quickly, I got involved with all sorts of things. As I grew older, my extracurriculars outside of school faded just because I was too old. So I started to do theater, I started to do football, I did track. I joined this group at my school called Peer Mentors, which basically provides wellness spaces and serves as, it's by students for students, serves as a supportive community for the students on campus. I diversified my experience, and the reason why this was so important in my process was because I gave 110% to everything I did first. Whether it was a football practice, a track practice, a peer mentor event, or a theater rehearsal. I gave my full self. And not only that, I extended myself to the adults in that led these communities. Contrary to my village years, where I kind of shut down because I felt like nobody was reaching to me, I decided to be resilient and reach to them. And I created relationships with some adults that I'll have for a lifetime. Of course, there was me and Rob. Then there was me and Miss Northland. She ran Peer Mentor. She was my AP English 11 teacher. Changed my life. There was Mr. Williams, my theater director, who showed me my passion for the arts, for truth, for performance. This is why I love being on stages, because of that man. There was Dr. Sacco. He was one of the track coaches with Mr. Evans, excuse me. He was also my AP Bio teacher. Told him about my dad, about my life. Was so willing to listen to me and to offer advice where he could. There was Mr. Bloom, my other theater teacher. I actually grew close with him and his wife, talking about my experiences, and so many more. I diversified my experience. I extended my hand. I decided to be a part of many different communities. And for that very reason, I not only had people behind me, I not only augmented my check-in community, but I was also allowed to figure out who I was. And this is where my term invisible manship comes in. I read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison in 11th grade, and there's a quote and it says, "All my life I had been looking for something, and everywhere I turned, someone tried to tell me what it was, but first I had to discover that I am an invisible man." That quote right there changed my life. Because by joining these communities, I was allowed to develop who I was in addition to my blackness, right? I was able to figure out that I was black plus, that I contained multitudes, that I was the football player, the track person, the thespian. I had an intersectionality of ideas. But I would have never got this far had I transcended the books, had I extended my hand, had I diversified the communities I was involved in. This is a quote from my common application at Harvard University. I write, "And what if I told you I made use of my invisibility?" Referring to the invisible manship I just elucidated. "For I realize that it is actually ability. I'm a black boy who acts a little white, who loves track, football, science, and the theater spotlight. So I can connect with the black boy, the white boy, the football prodigy, with the theater goer, the popular, or even someone who feels like an anomaly. With invisibility, I have learned to be seen, a leader and friend to many. For I finally stopped trying to be ordinary. I now will not be caught up in trying to be something from dusk to dawn. I will be me. invisible in all, Elijah Christopher Devon. And so I had developed who I was by the time of senior year, as evidenced by that application. But there was still something missing. I had developed a check-in community, I had my uplifting community at home, but I still hadn't tapped into this relatable community. There were other black males on campus, and there were other black males from the inner city, so I knew there had to be some people that understood remotely what I was going through. So for my senior Apex project, Apex meaning, the culminating point in our careers, I decided to talk about the black male experience at K-12 private independent schools across the nation broadly, and to focus on that black male experience at my school, Chadwick. And this was by far one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. I hosted study groups where I would bring black males, I'm talking kindergarten, obviously with different questions, of course, to 12th graders, talking about what they went through at Chadwick and how they felt. And I found that a lot of people were grappling with what I was grappling with. Feeling lost, feeling like a black face in a white sea, feeling like people didn't care about them. And in that community, we were not only able to relate, but I was able to tell them about my story. I created a community for younger boys that would come after me, that they would have a sort of relatable community that I didn't have at that age. And the only reason that they were really willing to open up to me was because they had seen how I had given my full self to everything I was involved in. They had seen that I never stopped trying. They had seen that I was resilient. And they believed in me. And they believed in that. And so they gave me the opportunity to speak for them in this Apex project. And I did. And I'll never forget, after the project, one of the boys that I interviewed for it came up to me, and he looked me in my eyes and he said, "My Chadwick experience will never be the same because of this." Just a sixth grader. And it just meant the world to me because had I not transcended the books, had I not diversified my experience, had I not realized who I was, tapped into that invisible manship, I would not have been able to speak for these black boys, to hold these conversations, to develop this relatable community, and to change that one black boy's experience at this independent school. It was so rewarding. And you remember Teacher A I told you about? Teacher A was the teacher that sent me out of class every day, sent me to the principal's office every other day. So during my project, I decided to go interview teachers from the village. Resilience. Never stop extending yourself. It's never too late. I'm a senior now. I was in this lady's class 11 years ago. I went back to her classroom. We sat in the very classroom that 6, 7-year-old EJ sat in so many years ago. And I asked her, I said, "Why'd you do me like that?" I said, "Why did you treat me like that?" And she began to cry. And she told me that she does believe that how she treated me was rooted in some subconscious characterization of what it meant to be a black man. She said that, "I knew you were from Compton. I knew you rode the bus." She said that. She said, "I knew you rode the bus. And you didn't look like everybody else in the class, and I think that influenced my judgment on you. I think that's why I sent you out every day." She admitted that to me. And we sat there crying. I was crying too, because I knew, because I had seen the result of never stopping to try, of never giving up on a place or on people. And then at the end of our conversation, we hugged. And she told me, "I now read literature on how to teach black boys." I said, "God works in mysterious ways." And then finally, I was admitted to Harvard University. Appreciate it. I'm wrapping up my first semester now. It's been a blast. It's so crazy. It's so weird not being at home with my mom. I came home yesterday, and the first thing that she did when I walked through the door was she just came for my life. Like, she was like, "What's wrong with your haircut? You're looking a little fat." Da, 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 da. I was like, hold up. I'm used to living alone, because at Harvard, nobody, I don't listen to very many people like that. So she came in and I was like, "Mom, like, come on." Like. But I just want to talk briefly about Harvard and I think why I got in. When I got to Harvard, I met the dean of freshmen asked to meet me. And I went in to meet with him, and he said, I kid you not, he said, "I reviewed your application personally, and I was in awe, of course, of your GPA, of your academic achievements. But," he said, "I was more impressed by all the things you were involved in, by how you diversified your experience." Now, I'm not saying that you need to diversify your experience to get into Harvard. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that because I had done that, Harvard saw something in me. Because I had done that, that showed them a certain resilience, a certain willingness to extend myself. And in that moment, when Dean Dingman told me that, it didn't validate it for me. Because whether he told me that or not, I knew that extending myself was so important in my story. But it just reassured me. Like, yeah, that's exactly it. So I guess, to sum it all up, to parents, I would say, make sure you're creating uplifting communities around your students, around your kids. Make sure you're building a support system, a village, as we say where I'm from, a village around them. To teachers, extend yourself. Mr. Evans extended himself, and it changed my entire experience. Had he not done that, I don't know where I would be today. And to students, grind. Yes, more than classes and books, but get in them books, you feel me? Grind. But also be resilient. Never stop trying. I never stopped trying. I'm a black boy from Compton, California, and I go to Harvard University. Don't stop, I appreciate that. Don't stop trying. Never stop extending yourself. Always extend yourself. Always diversify your communities. Be multitudinous. Have multiple identities. Be so many different things. And in all those things, love. I end all of my presentations, I end everything that I talk about with love. Because God is love. And I say that to say, love the schools that you're at with all their imperfections. Chadwick isn't perfect. No independent school is. No school is. But you have to love it nevertheless. Love the people in your communities, those that don't extend themselves and those that do. Those that look at you sideways and those that support you every single day. And finally, love yourself. Love who you are. As a black boy, young at Chadwick, I didn't love who I was at first. I was scared of who I was. Don't be scared of who you are. Love who you are. And don't be afraid to be idiosyncratic, to be strange, to be paradoxical. Because I am. And I love it. I love it. And in all those things, I think that we can begin to dance, as Rob would say. I think that we can begin to create more inclusive schools. We can have greater, stronger communities, with those check-in communities, with those uplifting communities, and with those relatable communities. The home working in tandem with the school. The student being able to develop his faculties, to develop his identity, to walk away from independent schools with a clear identity, a firm foundation, and really ready to change our world to do great things. Thank you.